Yeah. Okay. So for week 2, we are looking at the big, broad question of what's your politics. So I've brought on our director of the Student Union Intercultural Center to talk with me about this kind of big, broad question. So I've kind of titled this slide for this week, A Social Party, and I've got two what I hope you think are funny pictures. One is kind of a Western U.S. kind of criticism of communism as being kind of a drunken experience where people are just having these crazy ideas. The other one is a unknown story about the inauguration of Andrew Jackson, who afterwards, his party, right, where they were too social, they got drunk and they almost burned down the White House. Only burning the outside porch, it didn't quite reach inside. There was some damage. But kind of this, what happens when politics gets out of control, which some people think is what happened with Black Lives Matter, and then other people think with the insurrection at the Capitol. So this is always this big question, right? What is political, and how do we understand these things? So the typical textbook or the typical historical approach kind of talks about monarchy. There was a king, there was a queen, that was bad, and so that drifted into feudalism, where a handful of elites or rich people had control over the land. And the folks like us, we'd be the serfs and we'd get to work on the land. If we were super lucky, we'd be the manager of the serfs, and then we'd die. That turns into the great colonial revolution and the plantation system, most commonly in the United States South, beginning with white folks who turned out not to be very good workers, and then kind of at first a negotiation with American Indians, and then forced enslavement of American Indians, and then finally leading to the Atlantic slave trade, which seemed to work pretty well for Southern colonists through the plantation system, and really like feeding the whole world at that point, including the North and England. There are obvious problems with a slave-based society, as students wrestled with last week. And this led to concepts of the republic, which is what we seem to know today, where you vote for your legislators, they represent you, and allegedly they're going to have your best interest. And then this kind of big concept of the Greek concept of the demos, meaning that this whole thing is by the consent of the governed, which is you and I. So that's American history in a nutshell, of the most boring elements. So I wanted to present 3 kind of problems with this approach. And why this idea of pluralism, or that everybody gets an equal and fair opportunity to participate, is at best an ideal, and at worst a very bad, not very funny joke. So the first one is this very contentious idea within law, from really the beginning of the 1700s, where states like Pennsylvania, and then later other states had this clause that they put into their state constitutions called the Free and Equal Clause, meaning that if the government representation in some way was not representative of your interests, either as a farmer, as a merchant, as an indentured slave, as a woman, right? Any kind of identity that you form, then you had the right to abolish that government and call for a new government. A very radical idea, I think, for people today. But that was the basis of the state constitutions, right? The consent of the governed meant that you actually governed the state. So if anybody was representing you and they didn't represent your interests, you could get rid of them. I think in pluralistic politics textbooks, you'll hear something like, you can vote the jokers out. The difference, I think, in the Free and Equal Clause is that you did not vote the jokers out. You physically removed the jokers. And you had a legal right to do so. This then is kind of, obviously somewhat problematic going into the American Revolution and the Constitutional Convention. So Article 1, Section 8 establishes what Congress can do. So instead of trusting people to represent your interests, you come up with a list of things that they're allowed to do. And then, of course, you're allowed to do everything else. Probably the most under-mentioned statement within Article 1, Section 8 is that Congress is required, they're supposed to pass legislation to promote the general welfare of the country, meaning that every social problem is supposed to be resolved through Congress. The second kind of unknown clause was Article 1, Section 9, which allowed for the states to continue slavery until there was some federal legislation that was passed. Now, there was federal legislation passed in 1807. However, South Carolina decided not to follow it. So the slave problem continued. And so Article 1, Section 9 is kind of known as the compromise that led to the Missouri Compromise, which led to the Civil War, and which, leads to the problems of today. So, on the one hand, Congress is supposed to be the place where these political battles are fought out. But on the other hand, the very next clause, they give them a backdoor of not having to actually deal with any equity problems. So the most common argument, Director Nasser, for this system and why it should work and how everybody has an equal opportunity to participate is that, well, we live in a free market capitalist state. And so, there's only so many things that you can resolve through the political process. Everything else has to be taken away from some private actor in the economy. And so if you start doing that, oh man, now we're in socialism, and we might even go down the road of Marxism if we're not careful. They call it a slippery slope. So then I have to ask this question, right? When we're thinking of politics, especially for our students, is this idea of the political process simply like whoever is luckiest is going to win?
I mean, that's a good way to boil it down, but a lot of it just, I think, comes down to information. So, but that also comes down to luck. Who was privileged enough, who was lucky enough to know who the politicians are, what they stand for, what they represent, who they're going to represent, who they're going to serve. And a lot of it too, again, that information. What powers do you have if you're not satisfied after voting? What powers do you have? And, we've said that a lot when we talk about democracy. Yeah, we want you to vote, but that's not the only model of democracy. That's not the only mechanism of democracy. And when do you vote? Do you vote every 4 years, or do you vote, for your mayor coming up? We've got New York City mayor elections coming up the primaries are in June, the elections are in November. That matters much more at a local level for you. That's going to affect your daily life, who you vote for mayor. Yeah, the president is important, but that's just one aspect. So I do think luck is a factor, and it is manufactured. Who is lucky? A lot of that is predetermined in terms of who has power, influence, privilege, and that will kind of perpetuate into a system where the representation will continue to stay in the powers and the interests of those who vote and participate. So it's a vicious cycle of you're seeing the will of those who vote when we're not often making enough of an effort to include and expand the scope of who is lucky.
We've had some, we've had some luck, right? With the census work and then with the voting drives, from my point of view, with immigrant students, right? One kind of, I think, groundbreaking lucky experience that we've had is when immigrant students talk about not being able to vote because of their status, but using their skill set of advocacy or the knowledge that they do have to spread information to other people who are able to vote, including many of their family members. What other efforts are you working on at the Student Union Intercultural Center, and maybe a little bit about that Everything is Political project that you're starting with?
Sure, and just to mention again the experience of international students, they have the experience of coming from a country where the political system was very different than that of the United States. So it might not even had been a democracy that they left, or maybe it was a very corrupt and faulty democracy. Maybe it was an authoritarian regime, a communist regime. So when they come to the United States, yes, that shiny model of democracy is much more impactful and means a lot more and is valued more, whereas someone who might have been in the United States this whole time may take it for granted. So I think having that value of the experiences from students from other countries is effective and powerful in helping shift the conversation around what is so important about our democracy and how it can be valued. And the Student Union and Intercultural Center wants to make sure that you're part of this conversation. We want you to be, I guess, the lucky ones to have this information and know what's going on around you. We always invite speakers that are talking about current social issues that are affecting you. And we invite speakers who are going to say, why does this issue matter to you as students? And what can you as students do about this issue? How can you solve it? How can you fix it? How can you be part of the solution? So we really bring speakers that are going to help connect what you learn in your classes to what is going on in your community and what you can do as a member of the community to shift change. So we invite political leaders, and we want political leaders who look like you, sound like you, come from your neighborhoods, who might not have gone to law school or might not have had the most formal of education, but their path to politics began because they were concerned citizens. They saw a problem and they understood that if they wanted to fix the problem, they had to be part of the solution. And for them, that meant a path into politics. That's not the only path, but that was what they chose. There are many other ways that you can identify problems and be part of the solution by being part of community organizations or taking up advocacy work and activism work with organizations that exist. So a lot of the work that the Student Union and Intercultural Center seeks to do is to introduce you or reintroduce you to concerns and issues that are happening in your neighborhoods, in our world. Issue, you know enough about the solutions, and you can now go ahead and implement and activate those things to be part of it. And hopefully using the tools that you gain through your curriculum, through your majors, and transferring that into your careers when you graduate from Kingsborough.
Some of that, I think, and you froze a little bit, so I'm gonna re-articulate what I believe that you said, right? If we take two examples like Sunset Park and Brownsville, I think, one thing that I've talked with students about over the last few years that you're aware of, right, that we've done work together on, is I've had students who identify as Black students who have said, one of the main barriers to participating for them has been, it's pointless, right? That the haves always come out ahead, and this kind of racist structure, isn't going to change simply by good feelings. And so two kind of, I think, examples of the coursework that we've done in the constitutional law class, the POL 66 class, for criminal justice students has been to examine issues of gender discrimination in the workplace, and then homelessness is kind of a big, broad cause. And what I was pleased to find students were able to find out is that, this goes back to those kind of racist, sexist roots that is very much left out in that historical account that I kind of presented in the typical political science textbook. So students in this class this semester are going to be analyzing kind of this utopian concept of getting involved, of participating, with the understanding that there are real barriers to participating, whether we're talking about felony disenfranchisement, right? Like folks who have gone to jail who are now not allowed to vote for simple possession of marijuana, for example. But then there's also kind of this idea of trying to keep the faith, of trying to influence decisions, of using your skill set, and then just kind of maintaining your everyday existence. What would you say to those students based on our kind of collective work over the last 10 years, and then what kind of stuff they might be able to do this semester as kind of a concluding thought?
Sure. I mean, I've told students many times, and you've heard it, the time is now, and the people who are going to make this change, it's not Professor and I, it's you, So I think there's absolutely opportunity to keep the faith. The work is hard. It's a heavy lift. Change is going to take time. There'll be successes. There'll be backlashes. There'll be, small victories. There'll be steps backwards. But there's always going to be progress, and you have to believe in that work. If you continue in this path, then nothing's going to change if we don't make a commitment to make a difference. It's not easy, but you're not alone. So again, if there's something that's concerning you, if there's an issue that you're passionate about, something concrete that you can do is start right here in your class. Speak to your professor. What are your politics? What are the issues that matter to you? And then, I will be happy to work alongside with you and professor, and we'll connect you with organizations. We'll connect you with scholars and leaders and professors that are going to be able to help you towards this path. And the thing that's always empowering is you're going to find commonalities. The politics you hold will be very similar to the politics of some of your classmates, will be very similar to people who look like you, people who don't look like you, people who are your age, people who aren't your age. And that's where you can keep the faith and feel encouraged that this fight isn't your fight alone. There are people who are here to join you in this work. And with that, you have to have faith that there's going to be progress.
And I think just to add, I think, by offering extra credit for co-curricular experiences, it's not a way of minimalizing the work that we're doing in the class, but it's a way of recognizing student work outside of the classroom that can easily replace some of the assignments. And often my experience, right, that they're better work, right? The students are more engaged with the work because it's personal and relevant. So I think as we kind of continue through this process, we might come back and talk to students some more about some of the activities that are being offered through SUIC. But in the meantime, I guess, have we satisfied the social party aspect of everything is political? It should be somewhat fun, even though it's a difficulty.
Absolutely. And again, I encourage you to start here. What is working for you at Kingsborough? What isn't working for you at Kingsborough? What events and speakers do you want to see? Speak up in that sense. I'm here to listen. I'm here to serve you. And that's where we can work together in planning events and doing things that are going to be appealing and of your interest and of your politics. So this is one small way that you can start to exercise this influence and this power and get used to being part of decision making and planning of change.
Excellent. Thank you, Helen.
Okay.